The gospel for today is from Luke chapter 4, verses 14 through 21. Then Jesus, filled with the power of the Spirit, returned to Galilee, and a report about him spread throughout all the surrounding country. He began to teach in their synagogues and was praised by everyone. When he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. Then he began to say that to them, "Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." Oh God, enlighten our hearts, challenge our minds, inspire us with these words of Scripture. My message today is not a day at the beach, but they couldn't believe. Because if you read a little bit further in that passage, Jesus is rejected by those in his town, virtually run out of town. They could not believe it was he. After all, we had children here today. Jesus grew up there. They believed he was blaspheming, that he was taking the prophecy and applying it to himself with no basis in fact or reality at all. And they were incensed. Their minds couldn't wrap around the surprise, the potential, the possibility, the reality of the words he had just spoken, that the scripture could point to him. These were people that knew him. They knew him his entire life. They may have seen him get into mischief, I don't know. They knew who his mother was. They knew who his father was. They may have seen him play. They may have seen him stumble and fall. So how could this? How could Jesus be the Messiah? They just could not entertain it in their brains. And think about the time when they lived. It was so much simpler than it is now. So much simpler. We didn't have mass media. We didn't have TV coverage. We didn't have Photoshop. We didn't have people who had their own agendas putting out information onto the net like it was true. We didn't have reality shows that really aren't all that real. I want to ask you, when was the last time that you were surprised? Because that has changed since I've been born. Think about it. When was the last time that you were really surprised? How did you respond? Anybody have a surprise birthday party or anniversary party that they really didn't know about? Okay. Anybody have a surprise visit from someone when their house was an absolute wreck? Anybody win $1 million when they just bought the lottery ticket? Anybody get a promotion that they had no idea they were up for? Anybody hear some surprising news about a loved one, a family member or a friend that rocked you to your core? Think about it. How do you feel about surprises? Are they off-putting? I mean, good surprises can be off-putting as bad ones are, because you feel out of control. The folks in Nazareth were surprised by Jesus. They could not believe. They could not entertain the notion that he could fulfill prophecy. How many of you here can remember when life was full of surprises? How many remember a time when you didn't know the gender of your child until the child was born? Is there something lost in that? Yeah, you can plan, but is there something lost by that? How many of you remembered when you were anxious for what the mailman was going to bring? Yeah. Because you never knew. And it wasn't just junk mail. You got letters from people you hadn't seen. You got bills you weren't expecting, maybe. You got invitations to parties. I remember when getting the mail was a big deal. Do you remember as a child wanting to get mail? Yeah. Now I don't necessarily go to the mailbox for 2 to 3 days, because I pretty much know what to expect. We've become a generation and a society that wants to know beforehand. We avoid surprises in the littlest ways. When you read your email, do you scan who it's from and what the subject is before you open it? You make a decision. How many here have caller ID on their phone? Yeah. So you know who's calling you. It takes out the surprise. I don't answer the phone if it's a telemarketer. Do you? No. I wonder how many have to listen to my message before I realize, oh, this is somebody I want to talk to. How many of you remember waiting for the Sears Roebuck catalog or Montgomery Ward to see what was new, to see what it costs? We were a generation, at least my generation, I'm sure prior to me, that were continually surprised. There was a study at one point that people who watched the news consistently were much more fearful in the world. We've come to live in a 24-hour news cycle. How many of you believe everything you hear on the news? And yet, Generally, supposedly, they have at least two sources. It's a world that's changed. It's a world where we've become cynical, isn't it? Where we've had to become somewhat jaded. It's a world where Pastor Hanley can be seen as vulnerable because of a scam somebody sent through the email saying that he had been beaten up in London and they needed money. Did anybody, you got that message, right? How many of you wondered if it was true? I didn't get it, but I imagine I would have wondered if it was true. How many of you wanted to send money just in case it was true? Don't have to raise your hands. How many of you recognized it as spam and a hoax? But that isn't the way we grew up. That isn't the way the people of Nazareth believed. They didn't have spam in their mailbox. They may have had gossip that came down the road from another town through the travelers, and they probably had to figure out what they were going to believe there. But their life was so much simpler than ours. I guess the question is, if Jesus walked into this room, would you believe him? Would you recognize him? What would he look like? What if he looked like a bum that was dirty, that had been traveling on dirt roads? What if he hadn't washed in a week? Jesus upset the Jewish establishment. He didn't say things that were nice and peaceful and calm. He talked love and compassion and healing. But he also said it's okay to heal on the Sabbath. He confronted the commandments, the rules, not the commandments, but the rules that Jews were told to live by. What if someone came in today and challenged everything you thought and believed? Would you want to think that they were sent by God? Or would you want to run them out? I think you might want to run them out. But God is a challenging God. We don't know what to believe. Just in the news recently was Notre Dame linebacker, Monte Teo. Anybody know about that story? Okay. And supposedly he had this person, this woman he loved, who died of leukemia. It was all a hoax. Now, was he duped? He may very well have been. I don't know. But you can't even believe who's outreaching you on the internet now. So we have to begin to have a cynical filter. And what happens when that cynical filter affects what we believe here, because it isn't quite in line with what we've thought all along. I once had someone take my picture after a service. I worked at the United Methodist Elder Care Center as a chaplain for a long time. And it was the musician who wanted to take my picture. He had his camera. He was taking pictures of different people. Well, that was fine. I don't really like my picture taken, but it was okay. Next week he came in with the regular picture. And guess what else he came in? He came in, and this was 15 years ago, so the beginning of this stuff. He came in with a picture of me on a bridge in a forest with Renaissance garb and a unicorn. That was a little freaky to me. To think that my picture that was taken just standing there in front of an altar, that they could do that. You have to be careful what you believe. You have to use that cynical filter. I also knew of, and this is a true story, I'm not going to mention names, but there was a politician in the paper one day. And there he was on the beach with this bikini-clad girl. Now this guy was married. Innuendo. What you found out later was that his wife was on his other side and had been photoshopped out. Do you see how they can manipulate us? So you have to develop a filter. But how do you balance having a filter with encountering God in others, in people who don't look like us, maybe who don't talk like us, maybe who don't think like us? What if someone here fulfilled prophecy or began prophesying? What would you think? Because it would have to be pretty challenging. It would have to undermine some of your notions. How would you handle it? It's a question for you as a church. There's a wonderful story, which I first encountered in Dr. M. Scott's book, The Different Drum. And it's called The Rabbi's Gift. Now, I'm sure, I don't know if, if Reverend Peck actually wrote the story, because it's been recounted on the internet numerous times. Think about the gospel. Think about the people of Nazareth and Jesus as you listen to this story. Think about your church as you listen to this story. It's about, and I've kind of abbreviated it so it doesn't take too long. It's about a small group of monks living in a monastery. Their order was dying. People no longer visited their monastery ground or picnicked under the great oak trees. There were only 5 monks left, including the abbot. Now, a small hermitage was set in the woods of their property, and an old rabbi used to come for retreat and inspiration. The monks could almost tell when he had arrived. One day, the abbot came visiting when the rabbi was on retreat. Over tea, they commiserated over the lack of new people coming to church or into the synagogue. As the abbot was leaving, he said to the rabbi, "Don't you have any words for me, words of wisdom for me?" "No, I am sorry," he replied, "but I can tell you that the Messiah is one of you." Well, this put the abbot in all sorts of a tizzy. He went back and told this cryptic remark to his brother monks. All were confused and astounded. Can you imagine what you would be? Did the rabbi mean one of us? How could that be? Do you suppose he meant the abbot? Well, yes, if he meant anyone, he probably meant Father Abbot. He has been our leader for more than a generation. On the other hand, he might have meant Brother Thomas. Certainly, Brother Thomas is a holy man. Everyone knows that Thomas is a man of light. Certainly, he would not have meant Brother Elred. Elred gets crotchety at times. But come to think of it, even though he's a thorn in people's sides, when you look back on it, Elred is virtually always right. Maybe the rabbi did mean Brother Elred. But surely not Brother Philip. Philip is so passive, a real nobody. But then, almost mysteriously, he has a gift for always having just the right prayer when we are all in turmoil. Maybe Philip is the Messiah. And it couldn't be Brother Jonathan. He is so old and frail. His memory is not what it used to be, and he is not much use to anyone anymore. But yet, he always greets everyone with a smile and is willing to listen when others are complaining about this or that, and he always keeps confidences, though he has endured more tragedy and trials than most can ever imagine. Maybe the rabbi did mean Brother Jonathan. Of course, each monk thought, the rabbi didn't mean me. He couldn't have possibly meant me. I'm just an ordinary person. Yet supposing he did. Suppose I am the Messiah. Oh God, not me. I am unworthy. I could never live up to God's expectations. As they contemplated, a funny thing happened. More and more, the old monks began to treat each other with extraordinary esteem on the chance that one of them might be the Messiah. And they began to treat themselves with extraordinary respect on the off chance that they might be. What do you think happened? The story goes on to say, visitors came to sense the atmosphere of mutual respect exuded by the 5 old monks and became drawn to this community. The monastery thrived thanks to the rabbi's gift of imagining each as the Messiah. The monastery became a vibrant center of light and spirituality. I don't know how many churches that I go to that wish membership would grow. Think about what might happen if you looked on everyone here as the Messiah. Think about how you might invite friends or family or other loved ones to come to service. Think about the excitement that that might exude in your hearts, how your hearts might beat a little bit quicker. Think about your lives and how they might change, about how this church might change. If only you open yourself to surprise. If only you open to yourself to the Messiah in each one of us and validated that. Let it be so.